Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining. At CIQ, we're focused on powering the next generation of software infrastructure, leveraging the capabilities of cloud, hyperscale, and HPC. From research to the enterprise, our customers rely on us for the ultimate Rocky Linux, Werewolf, and Aptainer support escalation. We provide deep development capabilities and solutions, all delivered in the collaborative spirit of open source.
Okay, wonderful. So we are back, Dave and we are so excited to talk with you guys today about Fuzzball. Again, thank you to everyone who is on the Fuzzball team and has been doing all of it. Okay, so I know that we have some things to show us, Dave. So is there some context you want to kind of give to people first, and then we're going to dive into the juice?
Let's give the context. Yes. So, today is a big day. Today we have a bunch of announcements to make. And so that's one of the reasons for this webinar. It's one of the reasons, we're here and everything. So, one of the things that we can talk about is we have released Fuzzball in the AWS marketplace. And so what does that mean?
I don't know. Should we do a little dance?
We maybe should. I don't know what the AWS. Thank you, Rose. Perfect.
Hey, W.
Yeah. So, so this is awesome because we've been talking about Fuzzball for a long time, and we've been talking. We've been developing it for a while as well. And every time we talk about Fuzzball to somebody, at a conference or something, they get excited about it. And what we hear often is, when can I get my hands on it? When can I try it out? And the answer to that question has been a little bit like, well, because we've been developing it mostly for on-prem, and we've been focusing, even though this is a cloud, offering as well, and we have our own AWS cloud instance running, it's been hard to let people know how they can get their hands on it. So now there's an answer to this question. And the answer is, you'll go to the AWS marketplace and you'll search Fuzzball, and you'll be given instructions for how to install it in your own AWS account and get your hands on it and try it, which is amazing.
That is amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
So I know that this is like our proprietary stuff. So people are going to ask, can I play with it for free? But it's not, it's in the marketplace. So it is something that you would pay for.
Yeah. And right now, just with a little caveat too, right now we're just starting this. And so we're in tech preview. And so right now, the AWS marketplace listing will only be visible to people who contact us and are added to the tech preview. But that is for, a limited amount of time. And, we're going to go ahead and onboard some folks and do the tech preview. And then we're going to open this up, and it's going to go to where you can just go to the marketplace, look for Fuzzball, install it in AWS. So this is huge. This is a very, very huge announcement.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I always have a million questions. Who do they contact? I mean, I'm sure that inside AWS, it says contact CIQ, boom. They can also contact any one of us.
Right, right. And if you go to the CIQ website, there's a little contact us button. You just click that and send an email, and we'll be happy to, talk to you and get you ready to roll.
Oh,
so that's one of three big announcements we're making.
Oh gosh. Okay. Zip. Carry on.
So announcement number 2 is that we've been talking for a while about something called Federate. And Federate allows you to take more than one cluster and federate them, hence the name, into a single cluster. And so this has become, we've been working on this for a while as well, but it's become much more relevant now with the AWS release, because now you may have an on-prem cluster and a cloud deployment, or you may have more than one cloud deployment. And if you want to, you can take all those different clusters and you can present them now to users as if they were a single cluster. And so this is also huge. We've also gotten all kinds of people who've been interested in Federate because they're talking about, trying to administer an on-prem cluster and trying to burst to the cloud. Well, guess what? We're releasing that today. That's also, it's in tech preview. And so you can also contact us and start to use Federate as well.
Wow. Because all this time, these last, couple of years that we've been so excited about Fuzzball and it's been growing, that's the piece that people have been talking about the most.
Yeah.
Is Federate. And so what you're saying is that they can have, so how does it matter where in the world their cluster is? Is it kind of still a little bit local, or could it be anywhere that they are kind of using the resources from all of them in one place?
Yeah, I mean, they can be distributed anywhere. And yeah, that's the idea, is that you've got maybe you've got more than one cluster in two different sites that's both running Fuzzball. Maybe you've got one cluster on-prem and another one running in AWS. Maybe you've got more than one account or more than one region. And so yeah, that's the idea, is that you can take all those different clusters, and it's pretty cool because when you use Federate, it looks like you're just using a single Fuzzball cluster. And so you can do things to send your jobs to one cluster versus another. But the interface essentially just looks like a single cluster. So it's very, very simple. And once you know Fuzzball, it's very intuitive.
I'm thinking of 15 people right now that I'm going to call and say that this is ready. So this is very exciting. And then I know that we're recording this right now, but any things that you guys don't want on the recording, just let us know. We are going to take it and then post it later. So very excited about that. And okay, I'm sorry, that was number 2. What was number 3?
Third big announcement is we've also been working on a little project called the Workflow Catalog. And so what this is essentially an entire catalog of general kind of workflow templates that have already been created using different applications. So now let's say you want to start up a Jupyter Notebook example, but you don't know how. And I'll show this in a few minutes, but just as a broad overview, you go to the Workflow Catalog, there's a template in place. It has some fill in the blank, pre-populated values that you can change if you need to. And then you just spin up that workflow and go ahead, and you've got yourself Jupyter Notebook running. You can connect and do what you need to do, or, one of a lot of other applications as well. So yeah, so now it becomes really, really easy to get started with Fuzzball because we've got this catalog of pre-created workflows that's there, and it's going to be growing as we continue to create more.
This is really exciting. It really brings up like a million questions. But I don't know if we want to like dive into those particular details, like, well, and exactly how does it work? And what does it run on? And what do you need in your system? No, Rose, let's just get excited about what it is. So I do have one question that is a little bit relevant because we're actually going to Google Next in a couple of weeks, like, CIQ, a bunch of us. And you did mention AWS, and that is very exciting. We're going to just shout that from the rooftops right now and roll with it. But of course, there's going to be the question, what about the other clouds? So I know it's a little bit in process. Is there anything that you can speak to about that?
Yeah, I mean, basically all I can say is yes, we're definitely interested in running on Google. We're definitely interested in running on Azure. The engineers have done a really good job of trying to create processes that'll be as generic as possible and be as portable as possible so that we can, get Fuzzball running on these different cloud providers as quickly as possible. But yeah, the answer is that we're not there yet. We're in process, and that's something that we're definitely excited about and working on.
Yes, yes. And that is often a good enough answer, I find, in the tech world, right? Like, as long
Stay
as it's
tuned.
on the roadmap, like, it's going to happen, right? Because it never ends. There's always more. There's so much that you can continue to add. So getting excited about something and then knowing that it's just going to continue to iterate and iterate, and iterate. And it's just very exciting. Okay, so those are the 3 big main announcements. Thank you, Dave, again, and team who's working on that. So are we ready to see it? Is that
Yeah, absolutely. So I've prepared some kinds of things to sort of highlight some of these announcements and talk. This is a kind of it's a big, exciting webinar because there's a lot of stuff going on. And so I had a hard time trying to usually I kind of try to hone in on one particular thing and talk about one particular thing. And I do that because it's easier to digest that way. This is not that kind of webinar. This is a little bit more of a high level, everything in the kitchen sink kind of webinar. I want to encourage folks. We did a webinar back in January also that was a bit more of the what is Fuzzball? And let's do a little introductory kind of like step-by-step introduction. And I'll talk about some of that stuff as well in this webinar, but I'm not going to go into as details. So like in the comments, hopefully we can drop a link to the previous webinar We can make sure that folks have access to that. So you can watch that, to kind of get up to speed if I don't go into great enough detail with this. But yeah, I do want to just kind of like give a really broad overview of what the look and feel of Fuzzball, and then talk about some of the specific things that we're announcing today as well. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And just full disclosure, we've done a lot of webinars, but in the past we tend to use StreamYard. We're kind of we're not new to Zoom, but we are a little bit, this team, new to Zoom for webinars. So if something doesn't work right as far as me sharing my screen, or if everybody gets booted out of the Zoom or something like that,
I mean, you couldn't tell, could you?
sorry about that. But we're getting better.
We are. There was a question in here. I think that we answered it. So Aaron, let me know if we didn't answer it previously, but I'll just read it for you real quick, Dave, because I know you kind of got like a lot of screens open. He says,
Yeah.
Can you give some context on what is available today with Fuzzball and Fuzzball Federate? Interested in on-prem and other cloud providers like Vultr. I sort of answered that mostly, but if there's any more you want to add to that.
Yeah. So right now, like I said, we have AWS and Tech Preview. We also have Federate and Tech Preview. So you can technically use those things yourself, but you have to talk to us first to get access to those things for the time being. And that's essentially just because we are anticipating a lot of interest in this. And we want to make sure that we don't just open it up to everybody and suddenly have questions and comments and things from a zillion different people and we're overwhelmed, right? So we want to make sure to kind of onboard people responsibly, essentially. So if you are interested in using those, definitely reach out to CIQ. Vultr is kind of an interesting cloud provider because we use Vultr internally quite a bit to spin up. So if you're not familiar with Vultr, it's a cloud provider that gives you access to bare metal. So you can have clusters that are not VM, or you can have cloud resources that are not VMs, but they're more bare metal. And that allows you to do a lot of interesting things. But we use Vultr a lot internally just to set up kind of like on-prem simulated clusters and to use that. So yeah, I would be interested in talking to you about that as well. I'm sure we could help you set up Fuzzball and Vultr if that's something you're interested in doing. Yeah, does that answer the question?
I think so. Yeah, it was in the little Q&A, Aaron. So if it does not, it does. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, so I'm going to do just a really quick demo, like look and feel of Fuzzball. I've brought up like the main screen that you'll see after you log in. I'm going to go ahead and select an account. You can either select your own personal account or a shared account. I'm going to select a shared account in this case. And I should also highlight as I'm going through this, I usually try to highlight that all of this is API driven. And so what that means is that the web UI is hitting the API. We also have a command line interface, and that all hits the API. So you can do all this, everything that I'm showing you through the command line also if you want. And we also have software development kits, SDKs, so that you can, do all this in Python or something if you want. Okay, so I'll just kind of go through and I'm going to highlight some of my own workflows. So one of the cool things that you can do in this workflow history view is you can see everybody who's a part of this shared account, you can see their workflows. And so I can jump in and I can see, oh, well, Brian's doing something right now. And I can look and see what he's doing. I can't actually get logs from the workflow because those are for Brian, but I could see what the definition is. And I could open it in the workflow editor and I could, use this as a basis for my own workflow. So it's very, very collaborative. And I'm going to be talking about how collaborative that is, in a few minutes as I go through some other examples. But I'm going to go ahead and just kind of show you. Here's a very simple workflow that I created a little while ago. It's just a couple of jobs, job number 1 and job number 2. And so I can open this up in the workflow editor and I can get this visualization of what these look like, right? So this is the first job and there's a dependency here for the second job. And if I click on one of these, I can open it up and I can see things like, what's the command that runs? What's the environment that this runs in? How many resources does each of these jobs take to run? And I can also open a YAML file. So in the background, this graphical user interface is actually building a YAML file, and I can go in and I can see the YAML file that's being built, and I could edit that here, if I wanted to do something like that, for instance. So, this is just kind of a quick look and feel, very, very basic of what it looks like to create a workflow. If I wanted to run that workflow, I can just do like this. So I'll just say new test job. Go ahead and start that. There we go. And I should tell everybody this is actually running on AWS. So this is the CIQ. It's one of our main clusters that we admin and we use, and it's been running on AWS for a while. So this is the same kind of cluster that you can now spin up in your own personal account and you can use, or you can onboard your own users and have them use and things like that. Cool. So that's kind of like the workflow history and what it looks like to create a workflow. I showed you the workflow editor. And so this is how it looks to monitor a workflow. Now, one of the new things that we're talking about today is this workflow catalog. And so this is one of the new things that we've been working on. And like I said, you can go into this and you can say, oh, well, I want to run a job that uses ParaView, or I want to run a job that uses LAMPS or Blast or Stable Diffusion or any one of these. And so if you're interested in one of these, you can view the details. And now you see that there's kind of a fill in the blank sort of thing here where you can say, okay, well, there's some text that I want to fill in. I want to change the URL to the container, for instance, or I want to change how many cores we're going to allocate to this thing to run. You can look over here and you can see the actual fuzz file, but you can also just copy the application yourself and edit it. Oh, sorry about that. I might not be properly authenticated here, or there could be an issue with that. Anyway, if I go back to the workflow catalog.
What if I wanted to add my own thing in here? Can I add to the catalog, or is that like a administration thing? How does that get in there?
Yeah, I might not be properly authenticated right now, but yeah, normally you can create your own application. I've got a lot of different clusters open right now, so there might be some some issues with what I'm trying to do, because like I said, I'm trying to do an everything and the kitchen sink demo here. So some things, when you've got so many different things open at the same time, some things are bound to get a little messed up. But yeah, you would just go ahead and create your own application. That's definitely available to you. You can do that as well. And normally what you would do is you would copy. So I did actually copy this. It just gave me a little silly thing when I tried to do that. So when you copy it, then you can go ahead and change these inputs, or you can go ahead and open this up in the workflow editor and you can just, run it from there as well. Like I showed you before, that graphical user interface you can use. So that's the application catalog, just in a nutshell. You can see that we've got maybe, a dozen or so applications so far. That's going to be growing. So we're going to be continuing to add more to this catalog. We're going to be continuing to make this a better user experience. And we're going to be continuing to build this library out so that you can basically get started, as fast as you want. Cool. All right. So let's see. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, what it looks like. Okay, so once again, I'm kind of going high level and I'm skimming a lot of this stuff pretty quickly. So one of the things that we use a lot in Fuzzball workflows is we use volumes. And so I've got a workflow here that I'm going to be talking about in a bit more detail here in a second, but it's got a volume that we're creating, and this is a persistent volume, meaning that I can save data here, and then I can, see that data again in the future if I run this again. And another thing that we use, obviously, anytime you run any kind of a workflow, you spin up resources, you spin up actual compute resources. So one of the things that we've been able to do, so you have to configure those things, right? You have to configure what kinds of volumes you and your users want to have access to, and also what kind of resources you and your users have access to. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how easy it is to do that in AWS now. We basically have created a couple of workflows for you that you basically just press a button after you start your cluster, and you say, I just want the default AMIs that I have access to, and it automatically provisions for you two types of compute resources, one without a GPU and one with, that you can use with your cluster. And then it'll also automatically provision for you two different storage classes, one that's persistent and one that's ephemeral. So that workflow makes it really, really easy to spin your cluster up, and also to get it configured right off the bat automatically just by pressing a couple of buttons. So, that's one of the ways in which you can manage, very easily these resources in the cloud. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, and then I wanted to talk a little bit more too about a real world use case that we're working on right now. So we've been talking to some folks who, thought it would be really cool for us to try to see if a software suite called FDS would run within Fuzzball. So FDS is Fire Dynamics Simulator. And so I talked to one of my colleagues here at CIQ, Adare Soyinka, and very, very quickly, he'd never heard of FDS. I've never heard of FDS before. Very, very quickly, he was able to go to the GitHub repo, get a container, and create this workflow that runs this simulation. And essentially what this simulation does is it simulates how fire burns and how smoke emanates from a fire. So you can do things like figure out how a fire is going to spread through a room, how it's going to spread through a house, how it's going to spread through a forest, what the impact of the smoke is going to be, all that kind of stuff. And so in a very, very short period of time, he was able to go from, and shout out to Adare for doing this great work. He was able to go from not even knowing anything about this software to actually getting a workflow up and running that'll do a simulation. And so I was going through and I was thinking about what would be a good thing to demo, because, a lot of the things we've demoed lots of different things with Fuzzball over many of our webinars. And so we're always looking for new stuff. And I was like, well, I know that Adare is working on this. Maybe I should go and I should see. And this highlights once again how collaborative Fuzzball makes it throughout your team. Because I basically just went and looked on the shared account that he was using, and I saw the workflow that he had run. I grabbed it and I ran it myself, and I was able to save the output almost immediately to a persistent volume that I had. And so this is the actual workflow that I ran based on what he put together. And then I was able to run, he's got another workflow that I'll show in just a minute that actually shows a visualization of this couch burning simulation. And I was able to get all that up and running based on the work that he had done without even contacting him. And I did it in an afternoon. And then I basically sent him a Slack message and was like, hey, would you be okay if I highlighted some of the great work that you've been doing recently? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. So like, that is like the definition of collaboration, right? Somebody else in your team is putting in the work to get this done. They're able to do it very quickly because Fuzzball makes it very, very easy to get things up and running. And then you can just kind of go through and look at what other members of your team are doing, and you can grab those things and use them yourself.
I don't even know what to say. Thank you. Yay, hurrah, like golf clap. With these sorts of things, time and energy and resources and collaboration are lifesavers.
Right.
So yes, that's really awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of talk about this workflow just a little bit really quickly too. So the workflow, it starts off with this program in a container, FDS, and it also has some configuration files that we pull in. And then there's some commands here that we run. I could go ahead and I can actually show you.
Okay, so a little bit of a random question. Is there a way to share this with someone who does not have Fuzzball or someone
Uh,
who's not in your group?
Absolutely. So I could always let me see if I can open this in a new tab so I don't lose what I've currently got here. But yeah, you could always open this in the workflow editor, and you could always just download the YAML file. So I showed you the YAML file here previously. This is the YAML file,
Mm-hmm.
and essentially you can just download this YAML. There might be a few things. So if they have used the push button workflow that I was talking about previously, then they should have access to both persistent and ephemeral volumes. So the volume names might be a little bit different. They might have to change a few things around, but it should be very apparent. Once they've used Fuzzball for a very brief period of time, it should be very apparent what things need to be changed. Sometimes there's secrets that we used in order to access things like S3 buckets, or in order if we need to access images that are secret images, not like in private OCI registries. Those secrets are not exposed in these YAML files, but we reference them, and they're saved in a secret store on the right here within the secret store in Fuzzball. So you might have to update those. But that kind of stuff is pretty readily apparent. It's pretty easy to do. So yeah, you can totally share this across, like with somebody who doesn't even have Fuzzball. You could send them the file, and they could look at it, and then they could get Fuzzball and run it.
That's really cool. I love this word collaboration that you have said a few times. And so it's, yeah, exciting. Thank you.
So yeah, just to look at the logs again really quick also. So we can see that this is actually an MPI process that's running. We've got 4 different MPI processes running together. One thing I wanted to really highlight, and I kind of forgot to do at the beginning of this talk, is we created Fuzzball, and we talk a lot about high performance computing, HPC. And Rose, you and I were kind of discussing this a little bit before the meeting as well. I think that when a lot of people think about HPC, what they think about is like, well, somebody at a Department of Energy, national lab doing, climate modeling or weather modeling, or maybe somebody at a pharmaceutical company, or also like, something like that, like doing drug discovery, things like that. And it's usually thought of as very academic and, very kind of like science-y. But a lot of the stuff that we have shown over time with Fuzzball is things like AI training and inference happening. Um, People can use Fuzzball for like in the financial sector for Monte Carlo simulations to kind of figure out what kinds of investments they should be making in the future. People can use Fuzzball like the automotive industry. We've worked a lot with folks in the automotive industry showing how to do simulations of crashing cars together for safety and for performance and things like that. Um, Basically, there's lots and lots of people in different industries who wouldn't um, describe what they do as high performance computing, but they really are doing that kind of, they're using lots of different computers in the cloud all together to do one thing, or they're sharing some resources with their colleagues, that some data center where they can run simulations, or where they can run models and things like that. And these folks, um, we've kind of started to talk about performance intensive computing as a catch-all term, because there's not really a term yet to kind of bring all these different communities together and talk about them all as one. So that's kind of what we'd like to talk about here with with Fuzzball is targeting performance intensive computing. And this is, I think this is a good example of that. I don't think that a lot of the people who use this FDS program, a lot of them probably don't think of themselves as HPC folks, right? This is a little bit of a different industry. But yeah, so this goes through the simulation, gets here to the bottom, and it saves some output files. And so let me see. I don't know if my connection is still. Yeah, here we go. So here, I should show you too. I have another job running, and this job is still running, and this is the FDS visualization job. And so I just went over to this little VNC instance. I'll go back to that in a minute, but that's being backed by this job right here that's running within this workflow. And so essentially what Adare did, and then what I, grabbed from him and did myself as well, is we ran this simulation, and we did so with this persistent volume mounted. And then once the persistent volume saved the data, we were able to run another workflow that used that same persistent volume, and now it's got access to the output from that simulation. And in this one, we're running, a pre-baked container that has within it a virtual desktop, and it also has something called smoke view. So smoke view is what's used by FDS in order to visualize the simulation that was run previously. So let me go back over. So basically, this is running within this job up in the cloud in AWS, and it's giving me this little desktop, and I've got this terminal that I've opened up, and I've got access to the data that was analyzed in the previous job. And so I can go ahead and run that smoke view program. Oops, that's not what I do. And once I do that, there we go. Once I do that, I can see this little couch, and that's pretty cool. But what's really cool, let me go ahead and add to it some of the simulation. So that's smoke coming out of the couch. Oops. So that's smoke emanating from the couch. Let me go ahead.
Wait, what is this? Is this someone dropped a cigarette or something?
Yeah, so it's something like that. So basically, this is one of the, and I can rotate this around. We can look at the back of it if we want. This is one of the like proof of concept, one of the suggested proof of concept workflows for making sure that FDS is actually running appropriately. So it's a pretty simple little simulation of like a foam couch. And as this fire burns away, you can see the couch starts to deteriorate, and you can see where in the room the smoke would end up and how the fire is going to spread, and all this kind of stuff. And this is useful if you want to figure out exactly what you just said. Somebody drops a cigarette on the couch, and so how does the fire spread on this particular type of couch that's made out of this particular material? I assume that you could model the entire room if you wanted to, and you could start to see how the fire is going to spread through the room, depending on what kind of furnishings are near the couch, what kinds of materials those are made out of. I mean, you can already see too, like, how does the smoke distribute in the room? I mean, people tell you if there's a fire in the room, one of the things you're supposed to do is drop to the floor, and get under the smoke so you can still breathe and then get out of the room. Well, you can see, I mean, here's a simulation of that, right? You can see exactly why they say that. So yeah, pretty cool. And once again, because of Fuzzball, my colleague was able, within a very, very brief period of time, to go from not really knowing anything about the software, how to run the simulation, how to visualize it, anything like that, to being able to produce this. And then I was able to go and say, oh, cool, what am I going to present tomorrow? Adare is working on this cool thing. Maybe I'll grab that and show everybody, what he's been working on. And I was able to do that in an afternoon,
So you said this was in the S3 bucket. Is that where it gets stored once it's like done running, or does it do that automatically, or can you tell it where to go?
That's a great question. So what's actually happening here is so this is not in the S3 bucket. So we do stage data ingress and data egress a lot of times using an S3 bucket to persistent or ephemeral volumes within a workflow. But here, what I have is a persistent workflow. or a persistent volume rather. And and our volumes can be backed by lots of different storage types. In this case, we're backing these storage types on EFS. And so kind of a long answer to your question, but there's a storage class in Fuzzball using EFS, which is a persistent storage type. And I'm able to, save from one workflow into that EFS volume and then use it in another workflow if I want. The other thing we do a lot is ephemeral storage volumes. And you've probably seen, me demo those in the past. And what those do is they just spin up. They're also backed, well, they can be backed by EFS. They can be backed by almost anything, really. They can be backed by, NFS or, other local storage that you've got or, other types of things. But in any case, you spin those up on demand. And then we have, Fuzzball has a method of doing data ingress and egress. You can pull the data in that you need. You can save the data. You can, share it between different jobs within your workflow, and then you can push the data back out. One thing I wanted to show you too, I kind of forgot to show you. I showed you this really simple workflow. I'm kind of jumping around. I'm sorry. I showed you this really simple workflow, but I don't want to give you the idea that your workflows have to be simple. So here we've got a more complicated workflow. I like to show this one because it shows you how you can kind of like fan out your dependencies and then fan them back in if you want to. But this one is another one that uses, if I go in here and I look at the volumes, we can see that I've got this volume created. And if I go in and I look at it, we actually have this data egress. So what this is going to do is it's going to create an ephemeral volume. And that means that this job, these jobs, this job, they can all share the same data backed by the same volume. But that volume is going to disappear when the workflow is over. And so I can define this data egress here that says, find this file on this volume called blastp.out and make sure to save it here to my S3 bucket before you end the workflow. And so, this is another way that we kind of look at using volumes is by just doing data, like making ephemeral ones and just doing data ingress and data egress in order to, get the data onto or off of an S3 bucket, a GitHub repo, an FTP site. Basically, if it's got a URL, you can do it.
Awesome.
Cool. And then one last thing. So I've kind of talked a little bit about Fuzzball running in AWS, which basically all the stuff that I just showed you is running in AWS. And I kind of showed you a little bit about the workflow catalog as well and how that works. And I also like to talk a little bit about Federate. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing because I've got to like log out of my current cluster and log in and do a few things like that. But once I get that set up, I'm going to show you just a little bit of a demonstration of Federate. Now would be a good time if we have any questions.
I don't see any new ones that have come in, but there still are many people on here. So thank you guys for staying and hanging out with us, even though I had a little blip earlier. But that's wonderful. Yeah. So if any questions have come up, I mean, I imagine your brain is like mine. Is like, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do that? So go ahead and pop them in there and we'll get to them either as we go or maybe at the end if we have a little time for Q&A. I know you could probably like keep talking about this for several hours, Dave.
Yeah, I'm just the only reason I'm taking a break to breathe right now is because I'm logging into a Federate cluster because I'd like to give you guys a Federate demo.
I don't know what is going on with my camera. Sorry, that is like bizarre. I just don't move. Okay, so there actually was a question that I had and it's gone. Okay.
Well, it'll come back to you here in a minute. So I'm gonna go, let me just clear this. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, a terminal. So, all right. So what I've done is I've logged into a new cluster here. And so it looks exactly the same, right? This doesn't look any different from the clusters I showed you before, but this is actually Federate. So it's pretty cool because it doesn't look any different. but it's actually two different clusters that have been kind of mashed together into one cluster that I can use at the same time. And you can see that because you can see there's these different workflows that I've run, and some of them say Fuzzball on-prem stable, and some of them say Fuzzball AWS stable. So these are different clusters. One of them is in the cloud, and one of them is on-prem. I think it's actually in Vultr is where this actually is running. And so here in my terminal, so I've logged in to this particular cluster on my terminal as well. And this will give you a little bit of an idea of what the CLI looks like as well. So I can do, Fuzzball stuff. But I'm going to show you, I've got a couple of files here. Let's look at this submit.sh. And I have a fuzz file here. So I've got a hello world fuzz file. So I can submit this fuzz file as a job. So let me go ahead and look at this submission. I don't know if you can see any of that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a little bigger would be good.
I'm going to make the background.
Oh.
Oops.
Ooh.
All right. Is that cool?
That's cool.
All right. So what I'm doing is I'm running a command. Fuzzball workflow start hello world.fz. Let me just run that command really quick and let's see what happens when I run it. It's going to start a workflow. And if I go over here to my cluster, refresh, cool. I just started this workflow. There's the workflow I just started. It's done. It said, hello world. Awesome. So what does this script do? Well, it starts, well, let me, just so you guys can see. It starts this hello world workflow that I just started, but it does it in a loop and it does it 10 times. And every time it does it, it echoes, hey, I'm running, this iteration. That's really all it does. And then at the end, it's going to run this other command to list the last 10 workflows that I ran. So we can just see, what it looks like and where they ran. So let me go ahead and run that script. And that's going to take just a few seconds because it's got to go through and start 10 different workflows in a row. And so what you'll notice is that now I got all these workflows running, right? And some of these are running on AWS and some of these are running on-prem. So the way that we've got this cluster configured is that it just sort of randomly farms the jobs out to one or the other to try to do really, really basic load balancing, right? It just sort of says, okay, well, I don't know. I'm going to send you over here and you over there. Now, of course, you can put in other rules, to make things more intelligent. You could say, okay, well, maybe if the cluster has this many jobs already in the queue, go ahead and burst up to the cloud instead of having to wait in the queue for a long time. Or maybe if the job is a really big one, go ahead and push it up to the cloud instead of running it locally. Or maybe if I've asked for access to some volumes, which are only accessible on one particular in one particular environment, go ahead and run those there.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the kinds of things that
right?
Right. So those are the kinds of things you can do. And so this is the final command that I told you about that runs in that script. And it basically is just telling me where did all these run. Some of them ran on AWS, some of them ran on-prem. And so this is just like, just to kind of give you guys a flavor of, what it looks like to use Federate. Federate, to me, it almost doesn't demo very well. And what I mean by that is that it's so simple. It's just the same as using any other fuzzball cluster, right?
Same.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's what's so awesome about it is once your users learn how to use a fuzzball cluster, they don't need to do anything different to use Federate, right? They just go ahead and submit it to a different URL and then boom, now they're running on multiple different clusters and they might not even know it.
So money sometimes comes into play when people are doing cloud stuff. So one of the things that is awesome about Fuzzball in the cloud, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as soon as the job is done, there's a word for it, brings it down, right? Like it doesn't keep that instance open in the cloud and you're still paying for it, right?
Yeah, that's a great thing to bring up. And I'm glad that you brought that up. Yeah, you don't want to, like sometimes when people think about HPC in the cloud, they think that, one of the first things that springs to mind is let me just spin up a big Slurm cluster and have that sitting there spinning away and running, and then I'll submit my job to it. That's a really wasteful thing to do because you've got all these resources now that you've spun up and they're just sitting there and you're paying for them, whether you use them or not. And so that's exactly the kind of thing that Fuzzball in the cloud fixes for you is that, the Fuzzball Orchestrate platform, which is what I have showed you consistently, throughout this demo, that's something that runs on one server, and it runs in the cloud, and it's kind of running all the time, but it doesn't use very many resources. It's very, it's only like 6 CPUs and 16 gigs of memory is like the minimum or something like that. So that's very, very minimal. And that's your whole cluster. That's the only thing that needs to run. And so then that's the thing that accepts those fuzz files and says, oh, okay, you want to run this workflow that requires all these resources. I know I need to spin up these cloud resources, land your containers on them, execute your commands inside them. And then as soon as they're done executing these commands, I need to tear these resources back down so you're not, wasting all this money with these resources running. And that's exactly what Fuzzball does.
Awesome. We've got a question here. Wale says, cool demo. Thank you, Dave. Using Federate, is it possible to lift and shift, in quotes, along running jobs between clusters? For example, if a job is using checkpoints.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, I mean the short answer is yes, you could do something like that. The long answer is, however, it would take a little bit of engineering at the present moment. It would take a little bit of engineering on behalf of the user themselves. Mm-hmm. So yeah, as you said, you'd have to be using checkpoints. So you'd have to already have that set up, and you'd have to be, saving. We've talked a little bit. I mean, this is something that's still in like just kind of the talking about and wouldn't it be cool sort of stage, but wouldn't it be cool if we were able to, more automatically checkpoint jobs? We got some ideas floating around, but this is very far off. This is very much in the ether right now. But yeah, if you were checkpointing your jobs yourself and you already had that built into your workflow and you already had, things saved, then yeah, there could be technical hurdles that you could overcome based on resource availability, for instance. Like if you had an on-prem cluster that had GPUs and your cloud environment didn't have access to the same type of GPUs, that's just not going to work, right? So yeah, there's some things to bear in mind, but in theory, those sorts of things would work as well.
So do we have more on your side of the demo?
That's pretty much everything that I wanted to show.
Okay, this is very exciting. I do have one more question if it's okay.
Yeah,
we do have a couple of questions coming in over here. Evan, thank you so much. He says, can a workflow work across the different clusters? Like do job one in one place, then move to another cluster for the second job?
As of now, no. So a workflow runs completely, from the start to end within one cluster. So you can't split jobs up and have, one job within one cluster and another job within another cluster. Once again, I've heard some talk about, we've kind of discussed things like that a little bit. That kind of falls along the same.
Wait a minute, I'm trying to understand this in my brain. Okay, so there's the workflow, which is all the jobs.
Yes.
Right. So there's multiple jobs in there, perhaps dependent upon each other. So he's asking if you can, because you need whatever, a TPU for this particular part of the job or this particular part of the workflow as a job. So you go do that somewhere else. And then, okay, so sorry, my brain was trying to understand what he was asking. So you're saying at this point, no, the workflow all together runs in one place or another. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Visual aid, because they're, if you've got that question, Rose, I'm sure a lot of other people do too. Yeah. So like, jobs are like the atomic, parts of a workflow. And so jobs are what you build your workflow out of. You can have one, or you can have a zillion jobs. And, as of right now, this entire workflow, if I submitted this to Federate, is going to run either on-prem, like to be, for a concrete example, the Federate that I showed you, it's going to run either on-prem or it's going to run in the cloud. This entire workflow. It's not going to say, oh, well, this job is best suited to run on-prem, but these two jobs are best suited to run in the cloud. No, it's not going to do that. And, this job also kind of highlights one of the problems that would be associated with trying to do that, because one of the things that we're doing here is we're setting up volumes, right? And we have this ephemeral volume that gets set up, and it gets set up within the infrastructure here, and then it gets mounted into each individual job, and these jobs share the data between each other in order to process the data. So it would be kind of problematic to like create all the directories on-prem and then actually try to download the data, which is what these two jobs are doing, and not have the directories created because the volume's a different volume, right? So there's things like that that you'd have to kind of think through and try to figure out. I mean, you could probably do this with like persistent volumes if you had access to the same storage classes, backed by the same volumes in two different environments. But that you're getting into some kind of difficult things to do at that point in time.
I really like that question though.
Yeah.
That one, as time goes by, might become more important. So yeah, great. Thank you. Evan, that was great. Okay, Wale. And following a follow-up question, thank you. Is using Federate or not a function of something hard-coded in the workflow file?
No. Using Federate or not is a function of just where you submit the workflow file, the fuzz file. So yeah, you could either, open up a web user interface and submit your fuzz file that way, or I showed you that you can submit your fuzz file through the command through the command line. The command line, it's gonna submit that fuzz file, wherever you are currently logged in your Fuzzball CLI. So I didn't show you the login steps, but you go through a series of steps in order to select which cluster you want to use. We call them contexts within the CLI, but you select which one you want to use, and then you run a command to log in. And so whichever one you're logged into, that's where your fuzz file is going to get submitted to.
Yeah, he followed up. So it's a function of context, which
Yeah.
yes. Okay, great. So yeah, if there's any other questions, definitely pop them in there or reach out to us, right? We are definitely wanting to talk to you. We want you to be able to download it and play with it yourself and see how it works out for you, especially if you have the AWS. And then if it's other clouds, still feel free to reach out, right? Because we want to make sure that we are in communication with you. And even if you were, testing it out maybe on-prem or just on our list, to make sure that we reach out to you when other clouds are on the way. Plus,
and it also helps too, because we're like trying to figure out how to prioritize which cloud do we target next. And, I mean, we just went to a conference, for instance, a Gartner conference, in which almost everybody that we talked to was using Azure. And so like, if, that's pulling us in that direction. So if there's a bunch of people at Google Next that are like, no, we need to, this needs to run on GCP, like those votes count, right? Those help us to decide what should we target next?
Yes, exactly. Your voice matters, and we want to hear from you.
Right.
Because we are going to Google Next. So if you are going to Google Next, we would love to meet with you. Happy to do demos, talk to you about stuff. We want to know about your environment, what's important to you. All of these questions are amazing. I know that we got to wrap up. So I am going to put my questions on a note card for the next time, because I know we're going to continue to talk about fuzzballs. Time goes by. This is our baby. Maybe that's a weird way of saying it, but it's like what CIQ was built to do.
Baby, right?
So yes, it's
right.
very exciting that here we are and we are presenting in this way. Okay, so any final words, Dave?
Just that it's once again, it is a privilege to be able to demonstrate the work that so many other people put in. So thanks to the Fuzzball engineering team for putting together a beautiful product that I'm able to go on and show to everybody. And just it's really awesome to be able to do this, and it's very exciting that we got all these announcements today.
It is exciting to have lots of announcements. So again, yes, thank you, Dave. Thanks for coming on and showing us. If you would like a private demonstration, you want to know more about Fuzzball, you want to get it, you want to be part of the tech preview, definitely reach out. We are so excited. Okay, well, thank you, Dave. Thank you, everybody else. Thank you for being here. All these people. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time.